Before we do get started, I want to quickly acknowledge in the US context, the life of Dante Wright and the proceedings of the Derek Chauvin trial that has really brought increasing attention to the racial violence faced by oppressed people, both in the United States and around the world. And, we don't have obviously sufficient time to really delve deep into these topics during this panel, but do want to acknowledge that these are occurrences that have been happening across the United States and historically and also in the present across the world as they relate to colonialism, racial injustice, indigenous injustice, et cetera. So, that this is not the specific topic of this panel, but I did want to acknowledge it based on the experiences of many of the people that are both presenting and attending the Skoll Forum and our surroundings. With that, I do want to get into our particular session. As Claire mentioned, the title is Stakeholder Philanthropy, Creating Effective Collaboration. So I'm going to start just very quickly with a prompt, and then I'm going to invite each one of our speakers to respond to a particular component of that prompt. From there, we're going to break out into breakout groups, and each speaker is going to lead a discussion around a specific key question. So we really want this to be an interactive session once you get into your breakout rooms, and then we're going to come back and sort of share a summary of what happened in each one of those breakout rooms so that we can have sort of a variety of different voices being heard during this panel, or during this discussion, excuse me. So to get started, again, the title of this panel is Stakeholder Philanthropy, Creating Effective Collaboration. So from the Gilded Age to the present, tycoons and mostly white men like Rockefeller and Ford, and now Bezos and Zuckerberg, have hoarded vast sums of wealth. Then and now, a number of them are giving away their wealth through the foundations that bear their names. But is this an even trade? The wealth amassed by these individuals was and is often facilitated by unfair treatment or exploitation of workers, taking advantage of tax havens that diminish contribution to government-funded infrastructure, and irresponsible or even explicitly harmful environmental practices. While some of these economic activities have helped lift people out of poverty, many of them have created extreme inequalities and decimated plants and animals. Given this pattern of amassing wealth while exacerbating inequality, what role might foundations play today? How much should philanthropists even get a say in how they spend money when their parent organizations have in many cases been the causes of those damages? And what is their responsibility to guiding their parent corporations towards a better way of doing business? So relatedly, philanthropists and foundations do have an important role to play in this great reset. If done mindfully, they can even be catalysts in engaging others in the systems repair work that is needed. They can recognize a responsibility and power to not only guide their parent corporations or entities, but to also change the power imbalances that have been present for so long between those with capital and those without. This is particularly apparent when looking at philanthropy from a transnational perspective. We need to truly and honestly think about how we can change the underlying structural powers between those who are served by philanthropy and those who grant the monies. It's also about shifting the power nucleus in the first place, considering the role of local capital for local solutions. Because after all, economic inequality will always be persistent if wealth always comes from outside instead of also being created and spent at the local level. So how can power dynamics be better balanced between those who are profited off of and those who reap the profits? And how can philanthropy be used to right the wrongs of the past and present, engaging in the redistribution of wealth, regeneration of environments, and even reparations? And finally, how can philanthropy become a collaborative catalyst to building more just and biologically balanced futures for us all? So these are huge questions, extremely complex. We obviously won't be able to answer all of these today, but I felt it was important to pose them so that we could start having the conversations, and hopefully this is a kickoff to a much longer engagement between us all towards creating solutions. Now, I'm going to ask each of the speakers to respond to one piece of that. Obviously, it'd be an extremely heavy lift for them to respond to all. So each speaker has chosen to respond to one piece of what I've just prompted. I'm going to actually invite Ana Maria Arguilagos, President and CEO of Hispanics in Philanthropy, to share her thoughts with us first. Ana Maria.
Thank you, Cecilia, and to the Skoll Foundation for bringing us back together this year. If not under one roof, at least we're all on one screen. The part I would like to respond to is the crisis of the 1%, in my own words. And we think about 1% as income inequality, but I'm talking about a rather different 1% problem, one that pervades philanthropy every day, and it's not seen, it's not named. And this is the resource gap that you alluded to, and it's holding us all back. In the United States, Latinx make up 20% of the population, yet we receive only 1% of philanthropic investment. And that's 1 penny for every dollar. And despite strong geographic, economic, cultural, social ties between Latin America and the United States, Latin America receives only 6% out of the billions of dollars that the US foundations are pouring into international causes each year. So to state the obvious, this is a profound injustice. It's an injustice, but it's also a mistake because it undermines our ability to achieve our mission of a more equitable world and also our collective impact. So politicians and policies may still cling to the construct of borders, but today we know that our problems are borderless because we have pandemics, recessions, natural disasters, political instability. None of these are confined to a single community or even a single continent. Our challenges, as you well said, are global. So our solutions must be global as well. And philanthropy is uniquely equipped to drive these solutions, as we see today here at the Skoll World Forum. We have the power to convene, to bring voices from across sectors and borders together around common interests and ideals. And we do our best work when we honor this leadership, this generosity, the strength that flourishes. It's there already in impacted communities. It's essential that we invest in these communities and that we invest in strategies to create wealth in the people that we're working with, and to build power on the ground, rather than thinking that these resources are ours to control. We cannot narrow the widening inequality gap. We cannot close the distance, which is the theme of this conference, until we get serious about building wealth in communities that have for too long been shut out of economic opportunity. So specifically within philanthropy, this starts by shifting that balance of power away from fancy headquarters in Manhattan and Mexico City and into communities in Minneapolis, in Matamoros, in Medellin, in Modesto, Miami, and others. We need to respect the agency of our partners because they already have the solutions to address the injustice, and what they need is only their resources. It also means amplifying their voices. And in Mexico, we see an example where journalists are under daily threats, death threats, and we need to come together to help independent media groups keep their doors open and continue to shed light on the vital stories, like the murders of indigenous people every day, of Central American migrants, of human and environmental rights activists. It also means listening to what these voices are telling us. Trusting in local communities and giving them control is the key to enduring meaningful impact. In the early days of the pandemic, as the lockdowns and the school closures were fueled by fresh waves of femicide all across the Americas, many of us upped our support to shelters, protecting women and children from violence. No questions asked. No questions asked when we prioritized direct cash assistance to groups working together directly with day laborers, domestic workers, small businesses, migrant workers, undocumented family, those in detentions. We placed our trust in grassroots organizations and local leaders. That worked, and these initiatives illustrate our broader imperative to build a transnational, people-powered philanthropy, a democratic philanthropy that includes us all. We know the power of communities in action, and we've seen them rise to the occasion time and again. I'm from Puerto Rico, and I saw my people, they were pulling their neighbors out of rocks and rubble after last year's earthquake. Why would we ever doubt their ability to rebuild, to innovate, to support one another? Our task really is to hear them, to feel them, and to scale them up. Over the past year, donors have become gutsy. We have become accustomed to experimentation. We pushed past the bounds of what we imagined was possible, increasing payout rates, lifting grant restrictions, adding maximum flexibility, even issuing social bonds. How creative was that? We had no choice but to become fearless. And now, as there's calls to get back to normal, and they're growing louder and louder, more and more forceful, we cannot lose sight of our fearlessness. We must reject a state of return to the status quo. We need to lead into our imperative of impatience and be fearless in the pursuit of justice, voice, and agency. Create the mechanisms to break down the old and consider a new way of philanthropy to fully realize our people-powered philanthropy. And we must recognize that 1% is just not enough to support any community. So pa'lantes juntos until equity is 100% secured. Thank you, Cecilia, and I look forward to our conversation.
Mil gracias, Ana María. Thank you so much for those comments, Ana María. And I think that, at least for me, we have a little bit of movement in the chat. And please remember to put your questions in the chat. We will have a very short period of Q&A before we jump into breakout rooms. So if you do have some questions, do put them in the chat. I think, and we talked about this before too, just individually, but I think one of the key phrases that you used was that these are not resources they're not our resources to control, right? This is really needs to be a people-powered movement. And I think that this increasing sort of acknowledgement of that it's starting, but we have still a long way to go. And I think these kinds of conversations perhaps and hopefully will sort of open the minds of other philanthropists and foundations out there to sort of to listen and to change their actions based on that as well. And I do know that Hispanics in Philanthropy has made a lot of headway in terms of that kind of stakeholder philanthropy. So I'm going to go ahead and volunteer you to anyone who has a foundation and would like to learn more, to please do get in touch with Ana María and Hispanics in Philanthropy, because they are implementing some definitely best practices in terms of really trusting in local communities and like she said, investing in creating wealth and building power in local communities. So thank you so much, Ana María. Now I'm going to move to Tapionyandor, the African Regional Partnerships Lead of Impact Hub. Tapiwa.
Yeah, thanks very much, Cecilia. Yeah, good morning to most of you in the audience. I suppose good afternoon to some of you, and good evening. It's really a pleasure to be invited to contribute to the panel and the conversation. So yeah, thanks to Cecilia for the invitation, and also to Skoll for allowing this platform to exist. As Cecilia mentioned, my name is Tapionyandor, and I'm the Africa Partnerships Lead for Impact Hub Global. I'm based in sunny Harare, Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. And just for those of you who don't know, Impact Hub is a global network of entrepreneurial communities, capacity building programs, and collaborative spaces that inspire, connect, and catalyze impact. We've been around for 15 years. Our membership is around 16,000 people in over 100 cities and 55 countries across the globe. The majority of those are in Europe, but around 10% are based in the US. And I'm just gonna add the link to our website in case you're interested to learn a little bit more about us. Yeah, I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the construct of philanthropy and how I personally and some of the other people in my region have been experiencing it over the decades. And I think it is somewhat complex. Our relationship sometimes feels a little bit strange at times, but I think, largely the reason for that is just because of kind of this colonial past that most countries within the region have come out of. And I think the idea that a person or a group of people or an organization from some other geography have invested in thinking about helping us to solve our own challenges as allies can sometimes be, you know, a little bit difficult to sort of internalize as kind of the full truth. And that is, you know, sometimes a little bit unsettling to think about it in that way. But I just wanted to put it out there that that is sometimes the feeling. And I also wanted to just, yeah, qualify a little bit that, you know, this comparison between philanthropy and colonialism really only comes to the surface because of kind of the exclusivity of how we sometimes experience that relationship. And I mean that in the sense that mostly when we're talking about philanthropy and philanthropists in Africa, it's usually because those people exist in some other place and are really coming to us, to Africa, to help us in some way to advance our community. So that's the only reason why I would kind of, yeah, equate it in that way in some sorts. But I think how I would also describe it is sort of this relationship of abundance versus shortage in a way. And I think in recent years, we've been describing it really as kind of the difference between privilege and underprivilege, or inequality in some senses. But I think to really grasp the true depth of the chasm that sometimes exists between philanthropists and those kind of communities or individuals who they serve, I think, you know, words like abundance and shortage sometimes speak a little bit more to that. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. But I think, you know, there really is a need for kind of more honesty in the relationships between the two. I think on the philanthropy side, you know, some individuals, whether they be foreign or local, you know, really have the will and skill to help, you know, these key stakeholders and beneficiaries to reach these better imagined futures. But on the other side, you know, on the side of the communities and the beneficiaries themselves, sometimes receiving that level of will and skill and resource can be a little bit overwhelming in truth. And that's just because, you know, they at times come from a really different sphere of knowledge and lived experiences. Whereas, you know, these philanthropists can at times bring kind of prescriptive best practices in a way. And sometimes because those best practices aren't necessarily lived by the philanthropists, they're not always the most fit for purpose in a way. And I think that is just sort of the reality of how sometimes people can experience it. And I think in those kind of unequal relationships, communities can sometimes feel you know, really highly optimistic about the potential outcomes which might be coming their way, but we know that sometimes sort of these philanthropic dollars might fall short. And I think that is only true because at times philanthropists really target a lot of their resources and energies towards solving specific problems, whereas you know, some of those problems might arise from a real kind of multiplicity of factors that may not be considered. And so one last perspective that I wanted to share as sort of the devil's advocate in this conversation is just to share that, you know, the philanthropic agenda, of course, has been with us for many decades now. And from many perspectives, you know, there have been a lot of huge successes and challenges that have been overcome in disease eradication, you know, promoting sustainable livelihoods, empowering young women and girls, and so on. But I think just as is the experience of sort of our ever-changing world in terms of technology and machines, and how they sort of erode jobs as a consequence of them solving some problems. I think, this is also the experience that is true of philanthropy as well, in that by solving some challenges, actually sometimes new problems can arise. And that is just sort of something to bear in mind, when thinking about how best we can use sort of this philanthropic energy to solve some of these issues. So lastly, kind of as a stakeholder and sometimes a broker of these kinds of relationships between philanthropists and local actors, I would say that, to kind of close this gap between the abundance versus the shortage, it's really about us as local communities inviting philanthropists into our communities to really meaningfully engage in these lived experiences that we're having, so that they can really grasp the issues that we're going through and the multiplicity of some of the factors that contribute to the challenges. And I think this is sort of a way in which that we could create, together some more sustainable solutions together. Yeah. Thanks, Cecilia.
Thank you so much, Tapiwa. So many salient points that you made. I'm just going to sort of highlight a few sort of key phrases, actually, sort of these ideas of the relationship between philanthropy and the colonial past, and specifically, as you say, in the African context, but speaking as somebody who works in the Latin American context, also, we need to keep this in mind for many of the regions in which philanthropists and foundations work. And this idea that you brought up of the allies helping to solve for communities' own challenges and sort of the unique sort of challenges that come with that, and to really just be mindful and respectful that it's not just about swooping in with these best practices that as you mentioned. It's about really learning about the context and recognizing that we're all people, we're messy, we're complex, and we can all learn from each other as well. And we can all do, I think, also more quickly, and that's my opinion. But this idea of honesty in relationships as well, I think is extremely important that you brought up. And to be very honest, even hosting this panel as a small nonprofit organization in Latin America, I had to think about how honest can I be on a global stage? Is that going to alienate any funders for my organization? I chose to do it anyway because I believe that those that are aligned with our goals will step up. And we'll have those honest conversations with us. And I believe that that's true of Impact Hub as well, that we're all willing to have these honest conversations. That's why we're here. And then I think just the last thing I want to highlight that you said is that sort of this idea of collateral damage, as it were, that maybe sometimes when we solve a specific problem, the philanthropists, even along with the community, solve a specific problem, something else comes up. That's not necessarily a failure. That's just an acknowledgement of the complexity of human beings. So we just need to then go tackle that problem as well. So it's really this sort of kind of circular sort of, I hope, virtuous loop that we can create together. So thank you so much, Tapiwa. We're running just a tiny bit behind time. So I do want to go ahead and invite Shivani Garg Patel, Chief Strategy Officer of Skoll Foundation, to share her thoughts.
Thank you, Cecilia, for bringing us together to have this honest conversation that is something we continue to need to have more of. I've been encouraged to share a bit about our journey at the Skoll Foundation, and my hope is that our experiences resonate with others who also aim to shift the power dynamics that exist within philanthropy that Cecilia laid out at the top of the session. I'll start by sharing how the Skoll Foundation came to be. Jeff Skoll was the first employee and first president of eBay and believed in the power of entrepreneurship as a driving force for social change. He went on to create a portfolio of organizations to pursue his vision of a sustainable world of peace and prosperity for all. These include the Skoll Foundation, Participant, and Capricorn. It's worth sharing that Capricorn manages the foundation's endowment and is also a sister organization, as we both have Jeff's vision as a shared North Star. So from the start, Capricorn aimed to be mission aligned in its investments. Now, not all foundations have that kind of alignment, and we're super grateful that we have the opportunity to work together with Capricorn to further leverage our balance sheet towards our mission. A few years ago, the Skoll Foundation hit 20 years of existence. And I believe that we're at a promising inflection point. Over the years, we aimed to center the social entrepreneurs that we supported, trusting them as experts on the front line of change, to learn from them, understand their needs as we evolved our work. But at the same time, we were increasingly having internal conversations about the inequities we still saw in our work. We saw gaps we wanted to fill in who we funded and convened, for example. There was a lot of internal discussion and reflection to examine the biases we brought to the work and how we could show up differently as a funder, decentering ourselves. Over the past 2 years, we've been evolving our strategy with equity explicitly at the center. This has been a meaningful shift for us as an organization. And for us, that means centering equity from the inside out at a personal level, as an organization, and in the work that we do. We recognize that each of us are on the journey at a personal level with different life experiences that shape our worldview. And it's been critical to create spaces to reflect, challenge, and learn as individuals within the foundation. We believe that our internal investments will hopefully lead to better, more impactful funding decisions. Organizationally, we've established a roadmap for our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives to foster a culture of more belonging within the foundation. We've examined and shifted our practices around who and how we hire and who we choose as operational partners, for example. Even our board looks differently than it did a few years ago. It's now a global board, which it wasn't before. It's majority women with social entrepreneurs and innovators as members. Programmatically, we're trying to embed equity into who and how we invest, connect, and champion. And to me, this means acknowledging the power we have as funders and looking at how we can use it to shift those power dynamics that keep the status quo unchanged that my fellow speakers have spoken to. In the pursuit of driving meaningful, lasting change, acknowledging and using the power we have as a funder feels fundamental to our work. We're increasingly working with proximate social innovators and intermediary grant makers who have those knowledge, those connections, and the solutions, and are closest to those challenges. We're looking at ways we can effectively pass the mic, connect these doers to tables of decision makers and influence. It's been said in other forum sessions here, but how can we bring people closest to the pain, closer to the power? We have a long way to go on the journey to center equity in our work, and we'll continue to evolve as we learn and adapt. But I definitely feel momentum within the foundation. I'll share 2 things that have been key to building this momentum. The first is gaining alignment across all of our stakeholders, that centering equity is imperative to our impact. While many of our staff and our community of social innovators were already bought in, having our leadership and board on the same page has been a tipping point for us to start to more meaningfully live into that aspiration. The other thing that was extremely valuable was that we had a cross-functional team of motivated staff that we created last year to help guide our work on centering equity. This group helped the rest of us think about ways to develop an equity lens in our work, experimented, launched prototypes. Their work drove a number of internal and programmatic initiatives and evolutions of our work. To close, I'll say that it is imperative for us to move from equity and power shifting as buzzwords to the way we show up. Our board often reminds us to talk less and do more. And ultimately at the Skoll Foundation, we're trying to live into that intention of centering equity in the day-to-day of our work. And we hope to learn from our trials and from others who are far ahead of us in that practice, like many of my fellow speakers in this session. Thanks, Celia.
Thank you so much, Shivani. And I know that the Skoll Foundation has gone on quite a journey in terms of really sort of living this sort of vision that you have. And again, I'm going to volunteer you to share with those who are interested in implementing some similar things in their foundations to reach out to you, because I know that it's been it's been a journey, like you said. And I think that just to highlight a few things that you said, starting with this internal examination of the individuals in each organization, I think it's a really important thing to note. And that applies, I think, not just to the foundations and the philanthropists, but also all the NGOs that are working on the ground. I think that we really need to do a lot more personal work so that we can show up better in a collective fashion. Very important. And I think that you mentioned we have a long way to go. We do. But the important thing is that we're putting one foot in front of the other, and we're making progress towards that goal. And it's not going to be a quick fix. And that's the other thing, you know, that philanthropists, foundations, and NGOs, and you know, everybody, all the stakeholders in this journey have to acknowledge is that this takes time. This takes a lot of time to get it right. And we're going to mess up along the way, but we're going to learn as well. So I think that that's a really sort of important thing to highlight. And then just this very last thing that you said, Shivani, of talking less and doing more, I think is just really important to highlight. In fact, I want to give a quick shout out to a friend and colleague, Liz from iAlliance, from a panel yesterday, who just basically said, you know, we need to stop talking and just start making grants and just seeing what happens. And I think that's a perfect way to learn as well. So thank you for those thoughts and words, Shivani. I'm going to now pass the mic to our last speaker. Unfortunately, Urvashi Devidal, the regional lead of Sankalp India, could not be with us today as originally planned. She is quite ill, so hopefully we'll be able to share some of her thoughts later on in a recorded fashion. But now I'm going to pass the mic over to Kate Mohan, Senior Manager of Target Foundation. Kate.
Thanks, Cecilia. And I just want to say so much of what has been shared already really, you know, resonated with me. I'm really honored to be here today. Target Foundation is really early in its journey on this work. And frankly, we have a lot to learn. I'm going to focus in, Cecilia, on the question that you asked about philanthropy as a catalyst for a more just future. And I'm going to share a little bit about what we're doing at Target Foundation to build a more just future. And then I'll share a little bit about the journey that we continue to be on as we work to get there. So I think for us, the very first point, right, is really rooted in leveraging philanthropy as catalytic risk capital that's grounded in shifting power towards those who have been historically disinvested. For us, this has meant prioritizing multi-year, flexible funding, focusing on building and sustaining capacity for BIPOC and Global South-led organizations. And we recognize really that community-based grassroots organizations often have the deepest insights into the communities they're serving, and they're critical in designing and implementing solutions. So for us, this has really meant practicing trust-based philanthropy, including taking many of the actions that have been outlined by the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. Just to give an example, we have a partnership with Red de Impacto, which is a Latin American-led network that Cecilia actually co-leads. And it works in service of purpose-driven small business growth, really empowering organizations within the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Latin America. This effort came together in the wake of COVID-19 and needed a funder who, one, valued the expertise of Latin American leaders, two, could respond rapidly, and three, had a willingness to take a risk on a new approach. And this really aligned deeply with how we're striving to practice trust-based philanthropy. And so we were able to step in and provide a grant. And now for us, this is an opportunity to look towards continuing to learn from Red de Impacto. Next, I'll talk a little bit about the journey that we've been on to really set us up to be able to begin practicing trust-based philanthropy. And I think, you know, for us, sort of starts right with this idea of clarifying your organization's values and then anchoring your strategy to your values. And Shivani talked a little bit about this. You know, for us, some of our values include equity, community, and responsibility. And this has really enabled us to be clear about our belief that we have a responsibility to remove structural barriers and help create access for those who've been left out. The belief has enabled us to be bold in our vision, right? A world where all families and communities have the resources they need to determine and realize their own joy in life. And it's really been the alignment between staff, leadership, and the board of trustees that's enabling us to work toward building the capabilities and the operations needed to begin practicing trust-based philanthropy. And these are a heavy lift, but they're what allowed us to respond quickly to Red de Impacto's partnership opportunity. Another part of this, I think, is really an understanding the organization's legacy and committing to being realistic about the journey ahead. So for more than 100 years, Target Foundation has upheld the idea that the prosperity of business is dependent on the prosperity of communities. But our understanding of what that means in theory and practice has shifted over time, and I anticipate it's going to continue to shift in the future. And frankly, this can feel like a process of taking 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. So just to talk about this in a little more detail, the world's past ideas of prosperity were not inclusive. Some populations, usually communities of color, often in the global South, were invisible, while others were explicitly excluded. Today, we know that enabling prosperity for all is going to require promoting prosperity for historically disinvested communities. It's moving from a place of sort of acknowledging this legacy and charting a path to the future requires deep reflection, listening and learning to diverse points of view, engaging with all kinds of data, reassessing what you're doing in response to new information, and communicating and recommunicating ideas. And while this might sound straightforward, it's a constant process of iteration. In closing, I just want to emphasize that we approach this work with a sense of humility and a commitment to continue to listen and learn from communities. We don't have it all figured out, but we're striving to take the first steps.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I think that what you just actually ended on is, it really resonates. We don't have it all figured out, and anyone that says they do is kidding themselves, to be very honest. So I think that that's just important to say out loud as folks who are able to grant monies, because we also need to say it from the NGO perspective as well. And I think, and I see a few sort of notes in the chat around this, but the use of the word catalytic risk capital, I think is a really important sort of practice that many others can adopt. And, speaking from experience as well, you and I started conversations about a year ago. The Target Foundation definitely took a risk on Red de Impacto. We were still sort of building the plane as we were flying, but we knew something needed to get done and needed that sort of support that was flexible. And it has made all the difference, to be honest. We don't know exactly, where it can go from here, but we know that it's already, making a difference. And, that sort of willingness to take that chance is key in any kind of intervention across the world, really, for any kind of challenge. And we need to be less scared. Like Anna Marie actually said at the very beginning, that we need to stop being, well, you said fearless, but we need to stop being fearful as well. And we need to start practicing fearlessness. The only other thing that I really want to highlight, Kate, that you said is just this idea of trust-based philanthropy and really anchoring the strategy to the values. I think that sort of applies to everybody across the board. And this idea of alignment between stakeholders to get that down. I know, Shivani, that you also experienced some of that in the Skoll journey. So I just want to highlight that as well. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. We have only a few minutes for questions. I know that we won't be able to get to all of them. I'm hoping to be able to compile all of the questions and comments in this chat and perhaps issue sort of a written response to all of them so that we can make sure that everyone is sort of heard and responded to in some way. Right now, I'm only going to be able to pick 2 questions. I'm going to try to do it relatively randomly. I do see sort of earlier, the chat was lighting up with reverse RFPs. Please feel free to discuss that in your breakout rooms because it is an important topic. And I see that some of you already have some experience with that, and particularly, I think it was Christine that mentioned it first. But one of the first questions actually was posed was that it would be good to hear from panelists on what they have seen that works in terms of creating communities of practice between grantees and grantors, where the power dynamics, most often tied to where the money is coming from, can be neutralized so that honest discourse can move issues forward. Because at the end of the day, it is easier to talk about this, actually implementing it is harder. So curious to see if any panelists sort of can respond quickly with something that they have tried in the past.
Cecilia, I have a thought. Yeah, so one of the organizations that we work with at Target Foundation is Co-Impact, and a key feature of their work involves giving a planning grant that gives partners relatively long time horizon. I think it's 18 to 24 months. I'm sure somebody from the Co-Impact team can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. But during that time, they work really diligently and hand in hand with grantees on their strategy, planning, thinking through their future. And I'm highlighting this not because the Co-Impact team have told me it's so great, but because I've had a couple of NGOs share with me that they had really phenomenal experiences going through that process.
Cecilia, as an alumni of the Ford Foundation, I can tell you that something like the Build initiative is amazing. They pick good ideas, good individuals, institutions, invest in them, the capacity, very flexible ways, long-term, and then get out of the way and let us organizations just do the work that we know how to do. That wouldn't have been possible. So many organizations that pivoted. I mean, we all threw away our work plans last March 2020 and had to like reinvent. And you can't do that when you have an organization that's starved and doesn't have the capacity. So things like that I think are really, really important. Get out of the way, let them fly.
And I'd just love to add, I think for us at the foundation, and if I come back to my comment around the importance of creating a feeling of belonging within internally that we've talked about with the staff, I think the same is true with our community of social entrepreneurs that we funded. And hopefully would have to check in with them that they feel like there is a community of belonging, but that has been our aspiration that provides the platform and the space to be able to have more of that honest discourse. And I think the other thing is just asking, right? Like we need to break down the barriers because the power dynamics are there as much as in a past life and before I've been in the position I'm in, I was effectively a program officer. And as much as I thought I had a really great relationship with an organization that we funded, those power dynamics are still present. And so acknowledging that and sort of leaning in more to give permission and invite the feedback and invite, the conversation and the discourse, I think has also been helpful.
Yeah, maybe just in seconding what Anna-Marie said about the playbook going out the window a little bit last year, I think I've really experienced this in a positive way in terms of the grantors that we're in touch with and the grantees who we support as Impact Hub, because I feel like because we were all going through sort of this challenging time together, there was also something to help to bridge the gap in those conversations. So in times when we had trainings and sort of invited both parties, there was that commonality to help the relationship to build a little bit. So this is a positive and the negative, I suppose, the past year.
Thank you all. I only have time for one more question because I do want to give folks good time for the breakout rooms. But I do just want to sort of flag, I think these, I would love as an organization who receives donations to be given a planning grant. I mean, that is really sort of, I think, could be very catalytic for many, many organizations because it does allow the space to experiment. And I think that that's 100% necessary, and it allows that opportunity for those honest conversations. I do just want to flag very quickly as well that building of the relationships is super, super important. We still need to acknowledge the power imbalances that exist even there, though. I'm lucky that I speak English and also Spanish working in the Latin American context. A lot of my colleagues cannot access the donors that I can simply because they do not speak English. And that is another power imbalance that we need to acknowledge. Just, here, case in point, excuse me, here, we're all speaking English as well. Even though, for example, NMA and I both work in the Latin American context, and obviously Tapio works in the African context. So, we do also need to recognize that language, local context, and culture matters in terms of power imbalances as well. I want to ask one last question. I'm sorry, we don't have time to get to all of these excellent points and questions in the chat. But actually, I want to start with you, Tapiwa, on this one, if I can go ahead and single you out here. The question is, I'd like to ask panelists to give their views on donor collaboratives. Feels like the intention is to make everything more joined up, but in practice, it can feel like there is more concentration of power and possibly making it harder for grantees to make connections they need to. I'd like you to start, but then of course, any other panelists that want to respond can.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question. I think from the Impact Hub perspective, we're always just trying to find ways to lower the barriers with some of the grantors who we have relationships with. I think we take a lot of time in building up those relationships. And once we do, it helps us to sort of have all of those actors coming into all of the interventions that we have. So it changes a lot of the sort of dynamics. And in some cases, some of our programming is co-financed, and that helps us also to build those connections between the donors as well, which I think helps for sort of more meaningful interventions down the road once they can learn from one another. I hope that answers the question from the person who asked it.
Not all donor collaboratives are equal, and there's no silver bullet. So some are great intermediaries, they have great proximity, they know that their work is to bring equity and capacity. Others are just bringing money in and bringing money out, and I find a lot less use, for just those that are just, well, there is usefulness there. Those that are just moving in and out, money, more and better resources are always great, but those that really are leading with capacity and equity and building communities of practice, that then you get magic.
Kate, Shivani, did you want to add anything?
I mean, I think Anne-Marie has really made an excellent point here. And I think, there isn't a silver bullet. I do think part of the solution is bringing more diverse voices to the table, right? Spaces where funders and board members and community leaders and communities can be in conversation. I think Shivani did a really good job of teeing up some examples from Skoll, but we still have a lot to learn too.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I would say the intention, right, feels right, of like, how can we start to come together and collaborate in ways so that we're not having to make it more efficient, right, effectively, to access larger pools of capital. I think the execution is maybe where there's some work to be done. And to Anna Marie's point, there's some examples that maybe we need to be highlighting and learning from and create learning spaces for those collaboratives. So I think there's, as we've said, sort of the theme of this session, there's work to be done, but I think there's good intentionality and promise as well with the donor collaboratives.
Perfect, thank you.